The woman who never screamed until she dreamed of the wolf. Sound of rain. Do you know someone who never screams? Not out of politeness, but because they hold back. Someone who swallows anger, suppresses instinct, lowers her gaze, even when everything inside her wants to roar. This story is for anyone who's stayed silent for too long and one night dreamed of a wolf. There's a woman inside each of us who learned to make herself small, who discovered way too early that taking up space bothers people, that having opinions hurts, that showing strength pushes others away. She learned to bend the knees of her soul, to curve the spine of her desire, to whisper when she wanted to shout. This is her story, and maybe it's yours too. She was always calm, polite, discreet. At 5 years old, when her cousin pushed her at a birthday party, her mother said, "A well-mannered girl doesn't fight back." At 8, when her teacher ignored her raised hand, she learned that insisting was seen as pestering. At 12, when a boy said she was kinda aggressive for disagreeing with him, she realized having opinions came at a high price. And so, brick by brick, she built a prison of smiles. She learned early on that a good woman never loses control, that screaming is ugly, that anger is a sin, that being loved means being acceptable. And so, she dimmed herself. In relationships, she was always the one who gave in. "It's okay, no problem," her favorite phrase, repeated like a mantra of surrender. When he came home late without a call, she smiled. When he cancelled plans for the 3rd time, she understood. When he cut her off mid-sentence, she fell silent. And when he belittled her in front of others, she pretended it didn't hurt. At work, she accepted overloads without complaining. She stayed late to finish projects that weren't hers. She smiled when others took credit for her ideas. She apologized for everything, for speaking, for existing, for breathing the same air. And when she was overlooked for a promotion, she congratulated the person who'd taken it from her. At home, she was the first to wake up and the last to go to bed. She cooked, cleaned, and organized everyone's lives, while her own quietly fell apart. When someone complained about the food, she made it again. When they criticized the way she tidied up, she reorganized. When they questioned her decisions, she changed her mind. And when nobody thanked her, she thanked them for the opportunity to serve. She smiled even while being disrespected. She held back tears while her heart wanted to roar. She got used to the silence, even the weight it brought. Silence was her most loyal companion. Heavy, suffocating, but familiar. She knew its every nuance. The morning silence when she woke up already exhausted. The midday silence when she pretended everything was fine. The nighttime silence when she cried in the shower so no one would hear. There was the silence of swallowed anger, thick as molasses in her throat. The silence of pent-up frustration, burning like acid in her stomach. The silence of buried desire, throbbing like a wound that never heals. And the deepest silence of all, the silence of a soul that forgot how to make noise. She'd become an expert at invisibility. She entered rooms without being noticed, spoke without being heard, existed without being seen. Some days, she'd look in the mirror and not recognize the person there. A shadow of a woman, a ghost of her former self, a watered-down version of who she once dreamed of being. The years passed, like blank pages in a book she never had the courage to write. Each morning repeated the last, the same submission, the same self-denial, the same silent betrayal of herself. She had become a masterpiece of convenience, perfectly sculpted to satisfy others, while her true essence withered in some forgotten corner of her soul. But souls don't die in silence. They whisper, they shout, they beg to be heard. And when they can't find a voice while awake, They look for other paths, other languages, other ways to speak. And that's how she started to dream. The first dreams were confusing, fragmented, images of dense forests, shadows moving among the trees, the sound of branches snapping under invisible feet. She woke up with her heart racing, unable to understand why those images unsettled her so much. Something about them felt familiar, like an ancestral memory her conscious mind couldn't reach. In these dreams, there was a forest, dense, ancient, mysterious. The trees rose like shadowy cathedrals, their intertwined branches forming a green ceiling that let in only little glimmers of sunlight. Each tree seemed 1,000 years old, with roots stretching deep into the dark earth and massive trunks like pillars of a forgotten temple. The ground was soft, blanketed with leaves that rustled quietly under her bare feet. The air smelled of damp soil, of moss, of wild life, scents that stirred something primitive in her memory, something she didn't know existed. The forest pulsed with its own life. She heard the constant whisper of leaves, the distant call of birds she'd never heard before, the gentle murmur of a stream hidden somewhere among the trees. It was a complete world, untouched by civilization, where the rules were different, where strength wasn't violence, where instinct wasn't a mistake, where wildness was wisdom. And in this forest, there was a wolf. At first, she feared him. She saw his wild eyes shining in the dim light like two golden stars, fierce, penetrating, eyes that seemed to see through lies, through masks, straight to the core of truth. His exposed teeth, white as ivory and sharp as blades, spoke of a power she never possessed, the power to defend, to attack when necessary, to refuse the unacceptable. His dark fur rippled with each movement, muscles flexing beneath the skin like taut cords about to snap. He was huge, much larger than any wolf she'd seen in documentaries, ancient, primal, brimming with a force that made the air vibrate around him. There were scars on his muzzle, marks of old battles he hadn't run from. He knew pain, but didn't avoid it. He knew danger, but didn't bow to it. She ran. She raced through the trees with her heart pounding, her lungs on fire, her legs shaking with terror. She could feel his hot breath on her neck, hear his heavy paws pounding the ground behind her, feel his massive presence filling every inch of the forest. She ran until she couldn't anymore, until she tripped and fell, until she woke up gasping in bed, sweaty and trembling, fear bitter on her tongue. But always, just before she awoke, there was a split second of hesitation, a moment when part of her wanted to stop running, wanted to turn around and face that terrible, magnificent force, wanted to look him in the eyes and ask, "What do you want from me?" But fear always won, and she'd wake up. By day, she tried to forget the dreams. She buried herself even deeper in her familiar routines and tasks that kept her too busy to think. But sometimes, alone in the elevator, or washing dishes, or walking to the car, she found herself thinking about him, about those golden eyes, that powerful presence, the feeling of being hunted by something that might not actually want to hurt her. She started researching wolves, discreetly, like someone investigating a secret. She found out they're social animals that live in packs, fiercely protecting their own. She learned they howl not out of aggression but to communicate, to call out to others, to mark territory, to express emotions that have no other words. She discovered they were both predators and protectors, savage yet loyal. With each new piece of information, she felt something stirring within her, a connection she couldn't explain. But the wolf kept coming back every night, as if her soul had set a standing appointment with him. Sometimes he appeared from far away, just a silhouette among the trees, watching her with an intensity that made her blood race. Other times he was closer, sniffing her footprints, following her scent with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. Sometimes she'd spot him perched on a boulder, still as a statue of power, his presence filling the clearing, but he never attacked. He just watched, as if saying, "I am you, and I'm waiting." There was something in his eyes she couldn't decipher. It wasn't hunger in the way she understood. It wasn't aggression like she'd been taught to fear. It was recognition. It was like looking at a mirror that reflected not her face, but her essence, as if he'd known her for a very long time, even before she existed, as if he were there not to hunt her, but to rescue her, to remind her of something she'd buried so long ago she'd forgotten it ever existed. Slowly, night by night, her fear started to turn into curiosity. Why didn't he attack her? Why did he always keep a respectful distance? Why did those eyes feel so familiar, like she was looking at her own eyes from the outside? And why, despite her initial terror, did she keep coming back to the forest? Why did her feet carry her back there, night after night, as if it were where she truly belonged? One night, she realized she wasn't running anymore. She was walking slowly, observing. The forest felt different, friendlier, less threatening. The shadows that once seemed dangerous now revealed corners of mystery and beauty. The dappled light filtering through the leaves formed mesmerizing patterns on the ground, a natural mosaic. The bird's song was like an ancient symphony, each note perfectly in tune with the secret rhythm of the world. And when she saw the wolf again, instead of fleeing, she stopped. They looked at each other for a long time. She could see every detail of his face, the small scars around his eyes, telling of old battles and survival, the way his ears shifted at each sound in the forest, always alert but never anxious, the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest, breathing a calm born of knowing exactly who he was. He had a dignity she envied, a presence that filled the space without apology, without shrinking, without hiding. He existed fully, unashamed of his strength, unafraid of his own nature. He was everything she'd never been allowed to be. He took a step toward her. She didn't back away. Another step. She held her ground, though her heart pounded like war drums. Slowly, with a feline grace that contradicted his huge size, he came closer until he was just a few feet away. She could feel the warmth radiating from his body, that wild scent rising off his fur, the smell of earth, wind, freedom. His eyes locked onto hers, as if he wanted to say something crucial, as if he'd been waiting for her to understand a message sent a long time ago. Then something completely unexpected happened. He sat down, just like that, almost like a domestic dog, but still keeping all his wild majesty. And he tilted his head slightly, an almost curious expression, as if asking, "Why are you so afraid of me? Don't you know we're family?" That night, she didn't run away. She stayed. She gazed at that magnificent creature who seemed to guard the secrets she'd lost along the way. She absorbed his presence, his quiet confidence, his calm strength. She stayed until the dream faded, and she woke up with a strange sensation in her chest. Not fear, but longing. Longing for something she'd never known existed, but recognized as part of her. After that, her nights were different. She arrived in the forest and looked for him instead of hiding. He was always there, in different spots, but ever present, as though he was part of the forest itself, sometimes lying beneath an ancient tree, as if meditating on ancient secrets, sometimes lapping water from a crystal-clear stream she hadn't noticed before, his paws creating gentle ripples on the mirrored surface. He watched her with those golden eyes that seemed to see through her, beyond her, inside her, yet always with a look of curiosity and love. Could that possibly be love? They began walking together. She kept a few steps behind, and he guided her along trails she never would have found on her own. He knew every rock, every bend, every tree in that endless forest. He was the master of that realm, and she was his guest. Or maybe something more, his pupil, his protectorate, his sister. For the first time in a long time, she felt protected. Not because he was harmless, she could feel the power beneath his fur, but because his strength was there to protect her, not harm her. It was a brand new feeling, being close to something powerful that didn't want to control or use her, but simply exist by her side. During these silent walks, she began noticing things about herself she'd never seen before. How tentative her steps were, while his were firm and sure. How she always looked down, checking her footing, while he kept his head up, confident in the ground beneath his paws. How she still made herself small, even in a forest where no one was there to judge her, while he occupied his space with effortless, natural ease. He walked like he had every right to be there, like he'd never been taught he should apologize for existing. One night, they reached a clearing she'd never seen before. It was circular, perfect, as if drawn by divine hands specifically for that moment. In the center was a clear spring reflecting the full moon like a liquid mirror, casting a gentle light that turned the clearing into a sanctuary of beauty. The surrounding trees formed a natural wall, their tops leaning slightly inward, as if bowing in reverence to the sacred space. The wolf approached the water and drank, sending little ripples dancing across the moon's reflection. Then he turned to her, as if inviting her over. There was no pressure, just a gentle suggestion. Come, this place is yours too. She walked over slowly and knelt at the water's edge. The water was perfectly clear, so transparent it looked like liquid air. As she leaned in to drink, she caught her reflection in the surface, and it startled her. It wasn't the woman she knew. Or rather, it was her, but a version she didn't recognize. Eyes shining with life, a relaxed face without the constant tension, a straight posture free from carrying the world's weight. She looked alive, real, like the woman she might have been if she'd never learned to make herself small. The wolf lay down near the spring, watching her with that serene gaze she'd grown to love. There was something hypnotic about that moment. The moonlight on the water, his powerful presence beside her, the sacred hush of the forest that felt like it was waiting for something. She felt something shifting inside, something that had been dormant so long she'd forgotten it existed. It was a force, an energy, a truth pulsing like a secret heartbeat in the center of her being. Night after night, he brought her back to that clearing. They'd sit together quietly, each lost in thought but bound by a deeper communication that needed no words. She sensed his strength, the unshakable certainty of someone who knows exactly who he is and has never apologized for it. And he seemed to sense her pain, the confusion of someone who lost the way back to herself so long ago that she couldn't remember where it all began. Sometimes he'd stand up and move around the clearing, and she realized he was showing her something, how someone with a deep sense of belonging carries themselves, how someone who's never been taught that occupying space is wrong positions themselves, how someone who doesn't apologize for existing breathes. It was a silent but powerful lesson. One night, when they arrived in the clearing, something felt different. The air was charged with an energy she couldn't name, like the tension before a storm, but thicker, more expectant. The wolf didn't lie down as he usually did. He remained standing, alert, as if he were waiting for something important. She felt his anticipation, his contained urgency, like this was the moment they'd been preparing for all along. The stars seemed brighter, the moon fuller, the water in the spring clearer. Even the forest sounds felt different, louder, more present, as if nature itself were witnessing what was about to happen. He began circling the clearing, moving slowly and deliberately. His eyes never left hers, as though he was telling her something vital. With each lap, he grew more restless, more urgent, as if time were running out for something critical. She watched him, trying to decipher his message. What did he want? What was he trying to show her? And why did she feel like her entire life had led to this moment? Then, he stopped right in front of her. Those golden eyes met hers, and she saw something there she'd never seen before. A plea, a need, as if he were asking for her permission, or begging her to finally understand what he'd been trying to teach on all those nights. He moved closer, closer than ever before. She could feel the warmth of his breath, that wild scent that no longer scared her but felt familiar. Very gently, he stretched his muzzle toward her, giving her every chance to pull away until it touched her palm. The contact was electric. A jolt of energy shot up her arm, traveled along her spine, and exploded in her chest like a thunderbolt of recognition. In that instant, every disconnected wire inside her reconnected all at once. It felt like a long-lost piece of herself returning home from exile. Suddenly she understood. He was never a threat. He never had been. He was her. The part of her that had been silenced, repressed, buried under layers of conditioning and fear. He was her wild strength, waiting to be acknowledged. He was her truth, waiting to be spoken. He was her sacred rage, waiting to be honored. And then he did something she never expected, though it made perfect sense. He raised his head toward the moon and howled. The sound was primal, visceral, filled with both an ancient pain and an unbreakable strength. It echoed through the forest like a battle cry, like lamentation, like a statement of existence. It was the sound of every feeling she had swallowed, every word she had silenced, every anger she had repressed. It was the sound of truth finally finding a voice, and something inside her responded. It started as a tingling in her throat, then a pressure in her chest, a warmth climbing up her esophagus like lava, seeking escape after years contained in a hidden volcano. She tried to swallow, like she always had, like she'd learned to do since she was a little girl. But this time, she couldn't. It was too big, too strong, too urgent, a force that refused to be stifled any longer. She felt something rising from her throat, hot, old, buried for decades. A force that had been squashed, squeezed, and smothered for so long, she'd forgotten it existed. It was wild and civilized at the same time, both hers and not hers. It belonged to her and to all the women who came before her, who also swallowed their truth and stayed quiet when they needed to roar. And for the first time in her life, she screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain or despair, though there was pain in it. The pain of all those lost years, all the missed chances, all the times she betrayed herself. It was a scream of freedom, a primordial roar from the depths of her soul, the place that held everything she'd never been able to express. She screamed alongside the wolf, their voices blending into a symphony of raw power and wild beauty. She screamed for everything she had silenced, for all the yes answers that should have been no, for the boundaries ignored, for the silent violations, for the daily little deaths whenever she shrank herself to fit others' molds. She screamed for the 5-year-old girl who learned that fighting back was unladylike, for the teenage girl who swallowed her tears when they called her aggressive, for the young woman who made herself smaller just to be loved. She screamed for the woman who worked twice as hard for half the recognition, who smiled when expected to cry, who bit her tongue when she longed to shout. who shrank to fit the spaces drawn by others, who apologized for existing, for having opinions, for occupying space. She screamed for the suffocated soul, for the strength never allowed to be seen, for the truth stuck in her throat so long she thought it had died of asphyxiation. She screamed for the right to take up space, to have a viewpoint, to exist without apologizing at every breath. She screamed for all the times she betrayed herself just to be accepted, abandoned herself to be loved, lost herself so others could find her convenient. She screamed for sacred anger, anger that isn't destructive, but protective, anger that sets boundaries, that says no when it needs to be said. She screamed for a power that isn't aggression, but authenticity, for the wildness that isn't cruelty, but the truest nature. Her scream echoed through the forest like thunder, startling birds into flight, making leaves tremble as though nature itself were applauding, sparking echoes in corners of the forest she'd never known. It was the sound of her truth finally finding its voice. It was the roar of her wild essence, domesticated and muted for too long, finally unleashed in the world. When the sound faded, the silence that followed was unlike any she'd ever known. It wasn't empty or suffocating like the silence she'd carried for years. It was full, sacred, charged with endless possibility. It was the silence after the storm, when the air is pure and everything can start anew. It was the silence of peace, not repression. She looked at the wolf and saw something in his eyes she'd never noticed before. Pride. He was proud of her. For the first time in her life, someone was proud of her strength, not her submission, of her truth, not her convenience, of her authenticity, not her availability to meet everyone else's needs. When she woke up from that dream, she wasn't scared. She was at peace, a deep-rooted peace coming from a place within she never knew existed, because she finally understood that sacred anger doesn't destroy. It leads us back to our soul. And the scream she feared so much wasn't a loss of control. It was the roar of her truth finally allowed into the world. The world hadn't changed when she opened her eyes that morning. Her home was still the same, with the same walls that had witnessed years of silence. Her job was still the same, with the same people who expected her to keep being convenient. The people in her life were still the same, with the same expectations, the same patterns, the same unspoken demands. But something fundamental had shifted inside her. There was a new quality to her silence. It was no longer submission. It was a choice. It wasn't fear. It was power. It wasn't emptiness. It was fullness. Now she could choose when to speak and when to be silent. But it was her choice, not the world's. Her presence in a room felt different. Her steps had a new firmness. Her eyes a light that wasn't there before. She carried the wolf within her now, not as a threat, but as a guardian. As a source of strength she could access whenever she needed to remember who she really was. She started small, as all huge transformations do. A word here, a no there, a boundary set gently but firmly, an opinion voiced without apologizing. Each time she used her voice, she felt the wolf inside approving, reminding her that wildness isn't violence, it's authenticity. That having strength isn't aggression, it's integrity. At work, she began to question tasks that weren't part of her role, not aggressively, but clearly. "That's not in my job description," she'd say, without an apologetic smile. "I can't stay late tonight," she'd state, without making up excuses. She was simply setting the boundaries she'd always had the right to claim. At home, she started sharing responsibilities in a real way, not just delegating, but genuinely expecting others to step up. She stopped following others around with a mop, as though it were her job by default. She started cooking what she wanted to eat, not just catering to everyone else's tastes. And if people complained, she listened, considered, and then decided if the complaint was valid or if they just missed getting free service. In her relationships, she began to demand the respect she'd always given, but rarely received. She stopped allowing people to constantly talk over her. She stated her needs without feeling selfish, and when someone tried to belittle her, she no longer pretended it didn't hurt. She named the behavior and laid out consequences. And if anyone called her difficult or complicated, she smiled, because she finally understood that being easy to manipulate isn't a virtue. That being complicated sometimes just means having boundaries. That being difficult can mean having standards. Of course, there was pushback. There always is when a woman stops being convenient for everyone else. Some people drifted away, unable to handle the version of her that had a voice. Others tried to manipulate her back into her old place, using guilt, emotional blackmail, or simply ignoring her new boundaries. But she was no longer available to be small. The wolf inside her wouldn't allow it. Something interesting happened. Certain people, those who genuinely cared about her as a person and not as a function, started respecting her more. They appreciated her opinions because she shared them with conviction. They valued her presence because now she was truly present, not just physically in the room. She still dreamed of the forest sometimes, but now she walked side by side with the wolf, not as a stranger, but an equal. They were two aspects of the same force, the feminine and the wild, the civilized and the primal, the one who loves and the one who protects. Together, they were invincible. The forest of her dreams became a place of reunion, not fear. That's where she went to find strength whenever the world tried to push her back into silence. It's where the wolf reminded her she had the right to her own voice, her own power, her own truth. And each visit revealed new corners of the forest, paths leading to sparkling waterfalls where she could wash off the dust of the civilized world, clearings where she could dance without fear of judgment, ancient trees she could lean on to feel the strength rooted deep beneath them. The woman who never screamed had found her voice, and she discovered it wasn't a scream of destruction, but of creation. Not the end of who she was, but the beginning of who she'd always been beneath all that silence. It wasn't blind rage, it was a song of authentic power. The wolf was no threat, he was a mirror. The scream wasn't a loss of control, it was coming home. And the woman who never screamed wasn't actually calm, she was oppressed. Until she remembered that instinct isn't violence, it's a compass, the language of the soul, the sound truth makes when it finally gets to speak. Because not all anger destroys. Some anger brings resurrection. And she had been reborn, not as the woman she used to be, but as the woman who had always existed under the layers of silence, just waiting for permission to emerge. Now she knew. The permission was always hers to give, the power always hers to claim, the voice always hers to use. And the wolf, he was still there, inside her, a silent guardian of her truth, a constant reminder that she would never again have to shrink to fit into someone else's world. She could create her own space, make her own rules, and sing her own song. The forest would always be there, waiting for her.